Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're on to bag B of the Wildone Blockhead, the gearbox and rear suspension. In the bag we find lots of screws, another bottle of damper oil, and one of the best features of the old Tamiya buggies, the drive shaft boots. As usual, the contents of the bags will be poured out into some pots, so it's all safe and the parts are easy to find. Right, step 17, half of the gearbox and the differential. We need a 3x12 self-tapper, a 5x21 shaft, an 1150 bushing, which of course we're going to replace with a bearing, the gearbox drive cup with the pin, the large bevel gear with the bump on the tooth side, 3 small bevel gears, the main differential gear, and there's the large idler gear which we're going to need in step 18. Then we have A10, the oil hole cover, and E3, one of the gear case halves. Right, first we'll pop the oil hole cover over its hole and install the 3x12 self-tapper. The oil hole is a bit of a vestigial feature. These days, by the time the grease gets a bit old and thick, it's going to be time to rebuild the gearbox anyway. Next, we'll press a bearing into its hole where the diff ends up, pop the shaft into its hole next to the oil hole, and slide in the drive cup from the outside. Tamiya also want us to use some sticky tape to make sure the cup doesn't fall out during assembly. But as long as you're really careful and always remember to stick a finger on it when moving the gearbox, we can get away without sticking anything to the metal finish. Next we have the large bevel gear. Now there's 2 slightly different ones, and of course I managed to pick the wrong one. This one has the bump on the smooth side, which would end up misaligning the gears. We want the one with a bump on the teeth side. Before we slide it on, we're going to add a bit of grease on the rear face and a little bit in the splined hole. This will just make sure if there's any slop or rubbing, the parts are not going to be rubbing while dry. To install the small bevel gears into the differential, we need to add a blob of grease into each of the bits that the pins on the gears sit in. There's 2 per gear, grease them up and drop the gears in. And while we're here, we also need to add some grease in the centre hole where it runs on the bump on the large bevel gear. Now we just offer the diff up to the large bevel gear with the small bevel gears facing outwards. We're not going to bother greasing up the diff gears just yet, we'll sort that out in the next step. Step 18, more gears and the other case half. This time we need a M3x15 and M3x6, 4 3x12 self-tappers, a 5mm washer, an 1150 bushing, which again we're going to replace with a bearing, 3 850 bushings, which you guessed it, we're going to replace with bearings. There's the gearbox drive cup that doesn't have a pin, the large bevel gear with the bump on the flat side, the idler gear, E2, the gear case, and the folded metal gearbox mount. First, a quick note, if we pop the bearings into the counter gear first, there's a good chance that they're going to fall out and roll away never to be seen again. They are a little bit loose in the plastic, so we'll add the bearings to the shaft as we go instead. Right, before we start adding gears, we need to add some blobs of grease to the small bevel gears. Once we spin the diff, the grease will find its way to where it needs to be. Next, the large bevel gear goes on, which should sit right in the middle. It's going to get aligned properly when we bring the 2 case halves together, and we're also going to add some grease inside the splines just so they're not dry. Next we add an 850 bearing on the shaft so it's all ready for the gear. Then we can add some grease to the outside of the diff gear. Now it doesn't need to be particularly even, just make sure there's a bit more than you really need, and after a few spins it's going to spread itself around and even out. Next the idler gear slides in, small gear first, and we can pop in another 850 bearing on the top. Moving on to the other half of the gearbox, we need to press in an 1150 bearing into its hole. Then from the outside we slide in the drive cup. Just like on the other side, Tamiya wants us to tape it in place, but as long as we're careful we should be okay without. On the inside we need to add the washer over the splines and an 850 bearing. Although the bearing is only really acting as a spacer, so a bushing would do just as well. And of course a bit of grease wouldn't be a bad idea to add too. Now for the tricky bit, we need to bring the 2 halves together without dropping anything in the process. Take it slow and don't force it if it doesn't want to go. If it's really reluctant, take it apart again and find out what's not in the right place. Now we can install the 4 self-tappers to hold the gearbox together. Look carefully at the diagram to get the right holes. 2 of them should still be empty. With the self-tappers in, we can give the drive cups a test spin just to see how it feels. Right now it still feels a little bit stiff and maybe ever so slightly notchy. The important thing is it shouldn't hang up or get stuck. If it does, take it apart again and figure out why. After a few seconds of running, the stiffness is going to free up as the grease works its way round. The empty gearbox hole at the bottom is used for mounting the metal mount, which just slides over the holes, and we use the 2 M3 screws to attach it. The long screw goes in from the same side as the self-tappers, and the short screw goes in from the other side. Make sure all the screws are nicely nipped up, and that's the gearbox ready to install. Step 19, attaching the gearbox to the chassis. We need a M3x20, 2 M3x10s, and a M3x12 self-tapper, along with the chassis. Starting at the top, you need to install the long screw through the silver mount on the chassis into the gearbox. For now, we'll leave the screws a little bit loose so all the bits can line themselves up. At the bottom, the 2 M3x10s go through the cage into the metal mounts. Now, the metal is threaded, but it is fairly thin, so it would be easy to strip out the threads if you overdo things. The last screw, the self-tapper, goes through the silver suspension mount under the chassis into the cage. The cage plastic is quite flexible, so it can be a bit tricky to feel when the screw's fully tight without overdoing it, so be careful. Once the screws are in, we can go around and snug them all up. Step 20, finishing the job. We need 2 3x12 self-tappers, a 3mm washer, and a large body mount. First step, as we've done a few times now, we need to slide the washer over the threads on the body mount and screw it into the post in the middle centre of the chassis with the body clip hole running crossways. With that in, we can install the 2 self-tappers. One goes in the top gearbox mount and the other goes through the suspension mount into the cage. Just as the other side, remember the cage plastic is flexible, so watch out for over tightening. With those in, we've got a rather solid feeling gearbox. Considering there's not all that much holding it on, it does feel well mounted. And I know it's a short one this week, but it's been a bit busy outside of RC, so that's going to be a lot. Next time we'll finish up bag B with the rear suspension and make the buggy look like an actual buggy, so that's going to be fun. Until then, as always, thanks for watching, like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!